digital system.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back. Hope everybody had a nice lunch. Thanks for joining us. I know we're running a little bit behind schedule, but we had some folks traveling in from across the state, and we also wanted to make a little bit of extra room at lunch for some good conversation. So thank you for accommodating that. Welcome back to the second half of the day, Free Press Fest. This is our spotlight session, Beyond the Next Election, Building Montana's Long-Term Plan. And I would like to introduce, first of all, I want to say thanks to all of our sponsors, once again, for making this second edition of Free Press Fest, especially our premier sponsor, Montana State University, who has generously supported this and made this entry to Free Press Fest free to all, which is exciting. And then again, I'll remind everybody that we do have live captioning for those who would appreciate that. You can scan the QR code in the top of the screen there with your phone to access live captions for this event. So we're glad you're here for this afternoon spotlight session in conversation with leading voices in principled policy making who have the distinct experience and perspective on what it takes to pave the way for proactive strategies for Big Sky Country. I'm pleased to introduce the moderator for this session, our very own Holly Michels. As most of you probably know, Holly is the state editor at Montana Free Press. She previously led Montana State News Bureau, a 5-person team covering government and state politics for Llew newspapers in Montana. Prior to that, she worked as a reporter and editor at the Billings Gazette, the Helen Independent Record, and the Ravalli Republic. She's a graduate of the other university. Did I do that right? University of Montana School of Journalism, which is also, I should mention, a sponsor of this event. So with that, please welcome Holly Michels.
Is this on? Are we good? You guys can hear me? I have a very quiet voice, so if you cannot hear me, do this, because I often get yelled at for being too quiet. So I have the pleasure of hosting this panel, which when we had our call to plan it, I think each panelist at one point described it as maybe the most boring possible topic for a panel, but also the most important. So stick with us. I think it's pretty critical stuff. It is pretty meaty, but I think it's a worthwhile discussion to have. So I'm gonna start by introducing our panelists up here. And I think we'll go in alphabetical order. At the end, we have Director Chris Dorrington. Dorrington right now runs the State Department of Transportation, which is a department where you definitely want to be forward-thinking, which is our discussion today. Before that, he ran the State Department of Environmental Quality, and that's where he also was when he headed up the housing task force that the governor launched, which is something we'll talk about in this panel. And before that, he had another role at DEQ. He's also spent time previously at the Department of Transportation, I think 19 years in state government leadership positions. And then in the middle, we have Representative Llew Jones. He is a business owner from Conrad and a longtime state lawmaker who, depending on what chamber he's in, has run the House Appropriations Committee or the Senate Finance and Claims Committee. Those are the big budget committees for the legislative followers out there. I think he's known in the Capitol as the State Budget Master. And he also runs the Modernization and Risk Analysis Committee, which has worked over the last several years to look at Montana's economy, see how we're shaped now compared to 50 years ago, and see where we need to be looking 50 years in the future. And then we have Director Ryan Osmundson. He is the head of Governor Greg Gianforte's Office of Budget and Program Planning. He grew up on a farm in Iowa, moved to Montana in 1997. He also has been the head of the Senate Finance and Claims Committee, and then has been with the governor's office running the budget since 2021. So that's everybody up here. I think there's more. Be louder. I can be louder. There is probably more bio information if you guys want to look in the stuff. But to kick us off, I think I want to start talking about framing up an example of when I saw Montana operate state government from a place of crisis. So my first legislative session was 2017. That session got done in April. We were back in November of that year for a special session because the state didn't have enough money to pay its bills. I think anyone who went through that special session would say probably really devastating to state health department, still kind of coming out of the decisions made during that session. Lawmakers since that session looked at that and started working on ways to have a new approach for the way the state of Montana saves money, whether that's budget stabilization reserve fund, the fire fund, or other funds like that. I want to start with Representative Jones. You were a major player in getting that legislation crafted and passed. I want to ask you how Montana policymakers and legislators got to the point of recognizing we're having these budget crises where we were having special sessions pretty frequently through the early 2000s to deal with budget crises, and then how you go about getting the political capital to pass the legislation to change the way that Montana puts money away, because that was pretty hard to do at the time, especially with divided government, Republicans holding the legislature, Democrat in the governor's office.
Well, first off, thank you for being the host. Thank you for having us here on what I hope won't be too boring a section. So you get to listen to the nerds, the number crunchers. But anyway, what started to happen that we began holding these conversations that this government management by crises was just a bad plan, right? We basically waited till a bridge broke or till the session crashed, and then we found a way to have a special session, raise taxes, or slash and burn. And that's just not how we were doing it in the private sector. I grew up on a ranch, and you learned that you fixed the fence before the cows got on the road, right? That was just a smart thing to do. And in some really serious stuff, you wanted to fix your brakes, or you'd end up with a tow truck or maybe even an ambulance bill to pay. And so we started talking about, we weren't, this management by crises just didn't cut it, and that we needed to push back on the two tails that were getting us there, right? Because in this crisis, we had our 17-7-140, we slashed and burned, and we cut programs, or we just didn't do those things in a thoughtful way. So once we arrived that we should do something, then, and I need to recognize Director Carlson is out here. We have a very, very good staff. Pew helped. Then Oz, the budget director, was in the legislature. We started talking about we could do stuff better than that. That we could fix it before it failed, is what I like to say. We could push back on the two tails, right? Which is I call them the rebate and runners. They want to buy votes by sending that quick rebate out, pretending that everything's a surplus, except for it's not really a surplus because our bridges are falling in, our roofs are collapsing, we haven't taken care of maintenance. It's an illusion of small government, but it's not really small government. And on the other tail, you have the fund and forgetters. Well, change nothing. What do you mean measure outcomes and see if it's working? We don't need to do that. Just throw money at it. It'll be fine. Just fund it and forget it. And so both those tails were causing us a bunch of challenges. So we started holding that conversation and saying, you know, I'm not sure a good education is partisan. Why is that so partisan? I'm not sure that fires are partisan. Why is doing a good job fighting fires partisan? There's so much of what we do. Fixing a bridge is probably not partisan. Whether the hunter, the angler, or the guy hauling grain, you need to cross the bridge. And so we started holding those conversations in earnest. And ultimately, we started doing the math problem of what does it take to survive a 20-year recession and not have to slash and burn? How do we create the funding sources to invest in deferred maintenance? And you said, how did we get the political capital to do it? Well, we started talking around tables. You know, it's an interesting thing in this current political climate where the suggestion is that principled negotiations or compromises are somehow bad. We understand that as, well, go back to the ranch. You know, we negotiate across fence lines all the time. You fix that right hand side, both hold out your right hand. That's the side of the fence you take care of. So once we started sitting down around tables and recognizing everything didn't have to be partisan, that the only people that benefit from partisan is the parties, but that doesn't benefit Montana, we started thinking maybe we could do better. That this management by crises just grew government, right? It lost freedoms because you're willing to almost do anything to get out of a crisis. And once we started talking to each other, right? Because you really bad stuff starts when the talking stops. There's overlaps. There's things we can do, and that's not unprincipled, right? And then we let the data drive the decision. We said, what is it that this actually takes? So it was difficult to begin with, but in time, you know, the first round table was actually, and I point there because Ms. Carlson is here, we'd sit around a round table in her office. But we sat around a whole lot of round tables, Democrats and Republicans. We didn't always agree. I can tell you I don't agree with the guys up here all the time, but I reserve the right for him to be wrong. But no, in truth, we work it out. We find an overlap. And once we started talking and focusing on the problem on the board, instead of how much we didn't like each other, it's amazing what you can do. If you just recognize that everybody's not your enemy, and you need to keep talking, sometimes several times, and that good government, the smallest government now and the smallest government in the future, unless you want to kick the cans down the road with an illusion of small government while you have all sorts of bridges falling in, is the one where you rebate responsibly. You measure outcomes. And we've had successes with it. We're at a university system, performance-based funding for the universities, where we wanted to graduate more students on time with less debt. Seems like a good thing. It was difficult. We got huge pushback. But once we got it through, the freshman 15 credits, the co-requisites instead of prerequisites, all those things, guess what? We graduated more students on time with less debt. So we can do these things. And so the crisis of 2017 probably initiated it, gave us a catalyst to work from, and the right people in the room, and a recognition that talking mattered.
I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about getting those right people in the room. You know, if there's any moments or scenes you can share where you do have a lot of different perspectives. You had to get it past a Democratic governor at that point, what your plan was. The Republican caucus was definitely not unified, you know, like you talk about with the rebate and runners. Talk a little bit about what those discussions were, you know, in that roundtable, in that room, in Director Carlson's office. Yeah.
Can I just interject something just for 1 second? And not to, I hope I'm not. The previous question you asked, and I don't know if Llew can say this as much because I observed it, right? And I would say that Llew hit on something that I want to hit on again, just to make sure everybody gets it. That you asked, how did he get the political capital to get these things done? And what Llew just went through and his description of the details and the work that he did oftentimes in Director Carlson's office sometimes and all kinds of different offices, up in the budget office, he spends a tremendous amount of time, and those that make the difference and get the political capital to make these kind of differences spend the time to do it. They get into the details, they talk to people ad nauseum, and they don't come up with an idea and tell people, vote for it or else. They convince people, they sell, they do such a good job of that. I mean, if I'm just looking at those that get things done and have that political capital, it's those that spend the time to really get into the details and understand it, and Llew does a good job of that.
Do you think the legislature has enough of those people right now?
No.
Do you think that policymakers in the administration have that capacity?
I think they do. They come from a little bit different cloth. Just due to the fact that, and having been someone who's run for office, you oftentimes have to move a direction at times when you are running for office, and it tends to not cloud your vision, but it tends to already give you a bias before you even get there and hear the arguments, if that makes sense.
How, for everybody up here, I mean, how do you think we develop the people, get people in the legislature who you would say spend the time, put in the work, especially given, like you just said, what you need to do to get elected for office? How do you think we get to where that's the roster?
So how do we get to having more people around the table and talk? Well, first off, people have to find you believable, right? I live by a simple rule. Do what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it, right? Don't intimidate. Don't back down. Do what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it. You're not a puppet for some party leader somewhere, whether you're on the left or the right. The respect I have for people is always linked to those people that have the moxie to focus on why they're there. Because the pervasive pull, story-wise, when I walked in here, I was looking at, was it the gym that got built here?
Romney Hall.
Romney Hall. And I was thinking about the pervasive pull of ribbon cutting, right? Well, it's twice, so this time you can stay down there. So the pervasive pull of ribbon cutting, because Romney Hall was a very, very difficult lift. And one of the folks that was absolutely opposed to Romney Hall, now the leader of the party, then Majority Leader Art Whittick, fought against it. But when the picture was taken with Romney Hall, who I saw in the picture was Art Whittick. Because you know what? People's memories are short. And so this management by crisis, this cutting of ribbons, this running for election every 2 years, the ribbon cutters, you know, I just need to buy a few of your votes. How about a $1,000 rebate? You know, because I can kick the can down the road on that bridge to your grandkids. It's not good government, but it works. You know, so one, it's a difficult thing that the political cycle places upon us. It's actually the reason the Mara Committee exists, because we're trying to have a sextant that looks further forward. Because good governance isn't thinking 2 years ahead or 4 years ahead. You try to plan for the future. And the future is not completely predictable, but at least if you look to its horizon, we can do a better job. Convincing more people to run for the legislature, committees, things like this, it's the reason I show up to these, is holding the argument that we need to get past the simple soundbite in the paper. It's reading the work when a reporter does good work and actually says, you know, there's two sides to that story. Here's the reality of why they're trying to do it this way. And not punishing someone for doing the maintenance. You know, I think about St. Mary's. Let's talk about the $100 million problem. Everybody celebrates ribbon cutting. Congratulations. Tester, somebody got us $100 million. You know what the true story is? Somebody should go back 30 years, kick Burns, Baucus, whoever was there then in the butt. Why weren't they putting aside some money for maintenance? That's probably a $10 million problem. But you see, no one cares about the guy turning the wrench on the bridge. But man, the guy that delivers, you know, this management by crisis is a failing unless you have folks that actively work against it.
I would just emphasize a couple things that Representative Jones touched on. One is look at the data. So there was an entire trend of going into crises over and over and over. What does the data say? Now, the other thing I think I'd touch on is just the social media clickbait type stuff is so damaging. It's so damaging to the creativity of the thought, and that it intentionally divides people. Intentionally divides. So while Representative Jones and Director Osmundson are talking about bringing people to the table, look at the information and then just put social media to the side for a session in which you can actually have a conversation eyeball to eyeball.
On that process of like bringing people to the table, Director Dorrington, I want to ask you about your work for the Governor's Housing Task Force. I want you to talk to people here a little bit about how you ran that task force, sort of dual purpose. One, I think it's fair to say we were in a crisis at that point. I think the National Association of Realtors has said Montana's housing market is the most unaffordable based on incomes here in the whole country. So you're working that task force as we're in the crisis, but you're also trying to do the work to get us out of the crisis and look forward to keep us from being in a crisis 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 40 years from now, with whatever comes down the road. How do you go about picking who you bring to the table there and then guiding that work to kind of balance those two focuses?
Right. So I think, one, you're exactly right. We were in a crisis, and I wouldn't say we've solved the problem. So I think it's okay to acknowledge we didn't solve all of the housing issues in just the work we've done since July 2022. When the governor said by executive order, here's what we're going to look at, there's no question that that was a major issue. So when I looked at how to put the group together, one is multi-state, because I'm looking forward. We're going to propose legislation certainly out of the work beginning in July 2022. What is the legislature going to want to see? So data, consensus building, solution sets that are implementable. So you can't shoot for the moon and expect these guys to make all these really difficult decisions in 4 months. So you have to be very reasonable. One of the things that I've faced right from the get-go was someone would say, I want you to fix my problem. Well, okay, so is that one problem that you're explaining part of a thematic thing that then rises to the top? And then the other end of the spectrum is fix all problems. So there's a lot going on in housing. I mean, if you think about, and we had right at the very beginning, you'd say low-income housing or housing for the needy. These are issues that are very complex. Funding-related challenges. So we then focused our challenge on attainable, affordable workforce housing, so that trying to get to that starter home for a family or that first move out of a rental. So we put a panel together, 27 members. They were from all different walks. And what we tried to do is then say, if you're not named, because darn it, you make a list of people and then the first 82 people say, why am I not on that list? It's like, okay, got it. We just can't have a committee of 100 because it'll be untenable. Work your issues through the member that's closest to the issue that you're trying to solve. The second thing we did is set in a very aggressive schedule. So I'll never forget Patrick Barkey. He said at the very beginning, he was part of the committee, he said, how do you think possibly we're going to get to some solution set? I've been working on this problem for 15 years. And I said, we're going to do it in 4 months. We're going to get to some sets of solution. You're not going to solve all problems. I mean, that's a very, very basic beginning tenet. You cannot solve everyone's problem. And for every individual that comes and says, I've got an issue, I might not get to that one yet. But we began, we set an aggressive schedule, and then I intentionally made people stop from jumping to the solution. So the first thing, you put a big panel together, and then everyone comes and says, I know how to fix it. Okay, well, why didn't we yet? So what I did was, and I knew these guys were going to ask, I knew the legislature was going to say, show me the process. So I said, the first thing we're going to do is identify all barriers, challenges, and the things that are harming the supply of housing in Montana. I broke people into 4 different groups so that there was a real intimate focus on local issues, on government efficiency or processes that were broken, the construction subgroup, and then economics was the fourth group. But I said, start, and you may not go past the first step. Start with barriers. Next, develop a wide and creative solution set, and finally come to me with recommendations. The last thing I did is I mandated that within the solution set, there had to be a documented dissenting opinion. Because I knew, again, as we go to legislature, everything's going to be vetted at the podium. And the first time the worst way to pass legislation is when you hope no one comes to the podium with opposition. Instead, vet it, get your information out, work through the challenges ahead of time, develop a set of plans that's well vetted, and then the solution set comes from there.
I think for the director and anyone else who wants to chime in up here, and to note for the crowd, we do have 2 people from the governor's administration and a Republican who I think it's fair to say has worked with the governor's administration to pass legislation. So people kind of all in the same ilk. There are some dissenting voices, like you talked about the task force. I'm wondering for anybody up here if you can talk to me about why you feel like it is government's job to solve this problem. Like why is it the state of Montana's job to help me be able to find to buy a house?
Let me take the first cut at this. And this is how I started my very first meeting of the Housing Task Force. I was the director of the Department of Environmental Equality, and I'd already done some work. So that was July. Since probably April, May, I had been digging into some of what subdivision review and permitting looked like. I already knew we had big problems. So the first meeting I said, we're part of the problem. That's where I think government begins, where we had a process that was a barrier to getting things done, where we began either with an inefficient or ill-communicated process that wasn't understood by the masses. Well, shoot, that's on us, and we must figure it out, and we did. So where government's responsibility is to provide the opportunity where our roles are. If it's my job to do something, I better darn well do it well. I better communicate it well and clearly. And then I have to do that fairly, because if you have a developer in Western Montana, a developer in Eastern Montana, they better get the same answer for the same set of questions. There's no fairness in there if you don't. It has to be a clear process.
Yeah, and it's not the government's job to buy you a home. Let's be very, very clear. But you can take a look, and I always begin with, I realize I'm not smart enough to understand or solve all problems, but I try to look at those places where the problem does not exist or the problem is far limited. Why is it, for example, in housing, in Texas, you can buy a 3-bedroom home, and this is a true deal. My daughter just went to Texas, a 3-bedroom home that would cost you $750,000 in Bozeman. Why can you buy it in Texas for $250,000? What is the difference, right? What is it that they're doing that we're not doing? Why is, because anytime you have a shortfall, you have a supply side problem, right? Why is the supply of housing here limited? Is it an underlying infrastructure problem? Is it a water sewer problem? Is it a permitting problem? Is it some form of all of the above? Because what I know the solution isn't is helping pay more for rent, so you just have more expensive short houses. Is it a move-in problem? Is a person moving in from next door suddenly doubling the value of your home so you have an unrealized capital gains? How do we deal with that? What is, so if you look at the data, you can understand that government plays a role. It plays a role in those things where, I call it the free rider thing. You're going to have to share in the cost of the water or the sewer. Most people want the toilet to flush and are willing to pay for something to go away. I mean, those things matter to almost everyone. So how do we participate in ensuring that those facilities, those services exist, and that upon them, there's some sort of incentive to build the kind of housing that is attainable and affordable? Whether it's multifamily, et cetera. How do we work on that? And it's not easy, nor is it quick. You don't build houses overnight, but you see the supply changing. And hopefully in time, that'll work. And, I think Montana did a good thing of moving barriers there. I think you did good work on that. Not perfect, there is no perfect, but we can't let perfect become the enemy of doing good.
I think to shift that last question I asked a little bit, I'm wondering from your perspectives, why isn't it then, there's some people would argue it's government's job to do more. I think the Housing Task Force, and correct me if I'm wrong, came up with a low-income housing tax credit policy that didn't pass muster in the legislature. I'm wondering if anyone here can talk about what stopped that. Why wasn't that something that was attainable last session?
I have a quick answer, and you can provide the more complex version. But the other thing, I think people look in lenses in which there's a much broader policy objective. So around taxation in general, low-income tax credits gets lumped in there, and then the parties or the individuals then gnash it out and say, I'm against this as a tax policy. And so while you may have a good idea, or you may have developed a solution set, one item goes into a much larger policy bucket, and then it swims with all of the fish in that bucket.
And that's honestly the answer. Politics is the art of the possible. And a low-income tax credit was not possible, because it wasn't just low-income problem. It was a workforce problem. It was an attainable housing problem. It was a family problem. And so the argument was that we did need to focus on increasing the basis for supply, but a low-income tax credit was not one that you could get the magic. There's a magic in the legislature. I talk to all of you there all the time. 2651 won. And the magic wasn't there for that. It didn't exist.
That's the vote counts you need to pass someone plus the governor, if anybody didn't know that count. Talking about sales tax now. Tricky tax policy, hard things to talk about. I can't be a journalist up here and not ask each of you about a sales tax. I want to know from each of you if you think it's time Montana had the discussion about a statewide sales tax, and if you think a statewide sales tax would be a good idea for this state. Who wants to start?
I'll start, that's fine. That's a very good question. I guess I'll start with my perspective when I got into the legislature. It was discussions that we had multiple times, whether it was on appropriations or whether it was in tax committees or just around roundtables. The challenge was what Llew just referred to as the magic numbers. Whether you agreed with it and arguing for it or disagreed with it, there was just more disagreement on how it would be done, if it should be done, than we could ever get to a point of agreement, no matter what the negotiation might have been. There were many different ideas, some straight up sales tax, some local option tax, some replacing property tax, all kinds of different ideas. There could never get to be a point of consensus on that. That's why it's never gotten very far. I will say that I hear that it has doubled in popularity from 6% to 12%.
What's the poll? Is that the chamber
I don't know
poll?
who polled it, but we were kind of joking about that last session. It's a tough question because no one wants to be responsible, frankly, for instituting it to some respect. If it's going to happen, I would say that it will be based on a ballot or the citizens putting it on a ballot and getting it passed. Having run for office, I've been 5 elections. It's a tough one, and as I talk to my constituents when I was running, you find everybody in between. And some would say, yeah, I'd do it, that's great, but make sure we get rid of property tax. And others say, nope, we gotta get rid of income tax, or some variation. And so it was never something that you could get a real big consensus from my constituents, not even from the legislature. And so that, long and short.
I guess 2 follow-up questions for you. If there wasn't the magic vote count that you needed, if it was just you in a room looking at the state budget and looking at how the money comes in, do you think a sales tax would make sense for Montana?
I think when we had the discussions about it and you look at the data, I mean, it certainly makes sense from the perspective that we have a lot of tourists that come through our state, in the summer months particularly. So if you look at it from that perspective, just, again, all things being equal, the numbers make sense. The challenge is, and I think the pushback always became the fact that, well, it's just one more tax. The other ones won't go down. You know, we'll never buy down property tax with it, so therefore I don't want an additional tax. And to be fair, just knowing that's not a numbers game, that's just a human nature. And they're probably not wrong. And so that's why it never really got anywhere, was you'd have to be very careful how you did it. But to your point, yeah, the numbers make sense.
Do you think, looking at the politics, the governor can't run for governor again, he's termed out. Does his administration have any role in furthering that discussion? I mean, we've seen the chamber come out and say, hey, it's time to have this discussion. Do you think the governor's office should play any role in that?
I think any administration, whether it's this one or the previous administrations or the future administrations, are always having to look forward to not only the next election, but also what are they willing to spend their political capital at. You only have so much. And so if your political capital is being spent on something that comes back at a 12% approval rating, it's highly unlikely that you're going to get it through the legislature. So is that really where you want to put your capital? And I'm not saying that this governor would want to do that, even if it was, but it's something, as we've looked at it, and I'm going to say the grander we, it's a tough one until we get more support, frankly, from our constituents, from Montanans. And until they say they want it, I don't see it happening.
Representative Jones, to you, is it time to have the discussion, or would you think a sales tax is a good idea?
So one, I'll just touch on, we're a representative republic. I have the same constituents that he does, which means that it's their voice is still no. So to answer your second part of the question, yes, we need to continue to hold the discussion. I actually think the numbers have gotten better. The chamber's holding the conversation. I think we need to hold a discussion just because of the data, right? We have 13.5 tourists for every Montanan in the summertime. Someone's paying for those toilets to flush, right? And that's a reality. I think you're going to see the massive developments of the Yellowstone Cloud Moonlight Basin, et cetera. I think you're going to see their tax value exceed billings this year, because we're still selling the land. We used to sell the coal, the oil, the timber. Now we're selling the scenery, but we're selling the land. But we're good at taxing bushels of wheat and barrels of oil and square footage. We also are a very, very rural state for the most part. The more rural you are, we don't have the exact numbers, but if I use South Dakota numbers, we're getting about 20 to 25% of our goods from e-commerce. You may like or dislike Walmart, but it pays W-2 income tax. It pays property tax per square foot. You pay for the UPS truck to drive down your street, right, to deliver the good that competes with the outfit that pays for your schools. So we're going to have to start holding a conversation of, is a tax system that was built for the turn of the previous century still functional in a state that's still selling the land, but now it's scenery and fishing and other items? We aren't there yet, right? Our challenge is, if there's a math problem, a 4% jail tax can bring in about 1.3 billion. The property tax is bringing in 2.5. The income tax is bringing in about 2.5. You can't fully offset it. You get offset about half of either one. But the public's got to have faith that you're actually going to at least offset something. And then how do you do it? What goods are subjected to it? What ones aren't? And the greatest way you can get attacked in an election cycle is to say, geez, I might support a sales tax, in a representative form of government. But we are holding a conversation we need to continue to hold. But if we continue to become more Hawaii-like, during COVID, we had more visitors in Hawaii. If we're continuing to move in that direction, and we think we're going to fund this system of services people want solely upon the tax of the property owners that live here, given who's moving here and what's happening, you're going to hear more and more anger and angst over property tax. It's simply, there's no way out of it. So it's a conversation we're going to have. It's not right. He's absolutely correct. You're wasting your time burning capital in a legislature where you can't achieve the 26 and 51, and at least at this point, the Gianforte administration has said they will never vote for it. So that may change in this coming session. I'm not suggesting it won't, but it's not a conversation that's ripe yet, but it's one we need to have.
So-
Can I just highlight just one thing on that? I think what Representative Jones is saying, and one of the things I just want to emphasize, when he goes to balance a budget, and he looks at Director Osmundson, they've got two levers to pull, and that's property tax and income tax, in order to create the revenue, in order to balance. Because you're not simply going to find efficiency in government that's going to create a solution for a $4 billion problem. I mean, is that fair?
So if it's a conversation that's not ripe yet, but we've also seen like my property taxes went up $1,000, and we haven't seen the effects of the second home tax that passed last session, but fair to say that's hit. Helen has, I think, passed like the largest bonds ever in the state just to make the schools okay to have students occupy. I think it's fair to say, I don't know if crisis is the right word, but like we need to figure it out. It seems like you're saying, but if we can't have that sales tax discussion now, what's the stopgap measure? I mean, what happens? Because if 6 to 12% favorability, that's got to come up, I assume, a lot more before anybody really wants to put their name. I mean, we've seen sales tax bills every session I've been around, but I think we laugh about it in the basement of the press corps, like, oh, it's that 500-page bill. Okay, here we go. So what comes in the interim to get us through until the dam breaks or something else happens?
So first, I think the conversation is occurring, right? The chamber is actively saying, and it used to be the only person talking about sales tax at Farm Bureau events, and that was me, which usually got rocks thrown at me. And now I see a whole lot of folks talking about it, and I notice you're asking about it. So the conversation is occurring, even if it's uncomfortable, and the data is appearing as to how much is the deliveries. We can compare ourselves, especially after South Dakota, the Wayfair decision, where e-commerce would have to participate as well. So we are holding that conversation. There is two sides of the stopgap story, right? We did a whole lot of work on a property tax bill. Our challenge with so many of the folks that move into Montana and build the McMansions is that they only pay half the equation, right? They pay the property tax. And a $50 million house might pay a lot of property tax, but they're only paying probably 300 or 400 mills, and you come to a community here, you're paying 800 mills. So on a relative basis, it's still not huge. And they're not paying any income tax, but they benefit from the fire fund, they benefit from all of those items, prisons, corrections, where the income tax pays for them. Roads, right? So they benefit from so many of those items. And so effort was put to ensure that potentially through homestead exemptions and done constitutionally, that they, at least through their 95 mills, do a bigger share of schools. So we are looking at least at that side to cover it. And we're looking on your tax bill, your property tax bill, if you're an owner dwelling or a long-term rental, because that's what we're trying to incentivize, back to the housing conversation, that you're going to see a pretty significant tax decrease. So we are covering it for a while. But again, the math problem will become increasingly insurmountable if we do not begin to increase our recognition that we're no longer selling as many goods as we're selling scenery. That what was the basis of our tax economy is shifting. And it's shifting away. And I'm a natural resource guy, but that's just the hard numbers. I used to tell folks when I first ran that the third leg under our school was the natural resource and the severance taxes. That is so not true now. Or if it is a leg, man, that's an awful small leg. It needs to work out more.
Director Dorrington, I don't want to let you off the hook on the sales tax question. Time to have that discussion, and would you support sales tax?
I appreciate right now that the Montana Chamber of Commerce is raising the subject, because I do think it's important to discuss. I don't think enough people understand the revenue and cost situation, especially based on the set of expectations, most of which are reasonable. Can I get my kids to a school that's safe? Can I drive that road? Can I get to health care, right? Like those kind of things are reasonable expectations, but I also think there's a very unrealistic understanding of how expensive that really is. Those items, whether it's an infrastructure investment or a healthcare demand, or it's education or corrections. I mean, you think about big costs in the state, they're expensive. And the other thing that I face on a fairly routine basis, I mean, literally like 3 times a day, maybe 10, is can we get some additional capacity for our roads? Like this road is at capacity, it's slow all the time, or there's crash trends or something like. We are in a growth state. We are in a growth condition. We have been for a little while. I do not see that going away. And so the pressure on what we've always counted on, whether that's roads, healthcare, education, you know, the buildings in the Helena school system, what we have always counted on is receiving the most pressure it's ever had, and it will continue.
So recognizing we probably have some audience questions and maybe about 10 minutes left here, I want to shift this discussion to what is on the horizon for you all. What are you seeing as the next things that we need to be looking at proactively? I'm curious too about it. Last session, we had the big trust bill passed that's putting money away for certain things. There's some childcare money in there. There's pension money. There's a lot of different pots.
A little bit of bridge money.
A little bit of roads and bridges. I'm wondering if you can each talk about what you see are the next things that you really want Montana to buckle down on and be like, look, this is where we need to be planning ahead. This is where we need to be proactive. And especially if it's tied to that trust bill, I'm wondering how that sort of factors into that discussion. And for each of you, whoever wants to start.
I'll begin with something that's difficult, and it's been difficult for Montana to accept for a long time, is that our behavior and our actions impact others. So when in the transportation world where I'm trying to improve transportation safety, the number one problem I am battling is behavior. Driving impaired, driving too fast, driving distracted. You know, these things have real cost. So when you cause a crash, when you shut down a road, and I get noticed probably now more than ever, we are closing lanes on the interstate or closing the interstate due to crashes. That is not something that's happened in our history, and certainly it's now in the recent past, and it's going to continue. I'm imploring people to improve the behavior, and let's pass a couple bills that just mandate improved behavior. That alone was going to take a burden off of some of what we're forced to try to overcome at the basis. The next part for me is that infrastructure that's being hit hard is going to continue to be hit hard. I don't think people know that from 1931 to 1941, we built 1,200 timber frame bridges in Montana. We just put them on a printer and just put them out. They worked great in 1931 and 1941. Right now, you look at a FedEx truck or a UPS delivery truck, it is bigger than some of the freight movement of the 1930s trucks. And that's just the normal guy going down a dirt road, hitting a river bridge and making it to a subdivision that never existed before. So we're going to see additional pressure. I see challenges in our bridges especially. Right now we're maintaining pavements pretty well with the existing investment, but bridges are going to be a challenge for us going forward. And so as the federal program grows, we have inflation. So IIJA, which was the last federal transportation authorization bill, I speak in acronyms, that increased transportation funding for the nation by 20%. Because the government aimed a large tranche of money at a certain sector, we saw inflation rates of 40+% in certain areas of steel, concrete, and certain structural members. So you see, as the demand or the opportunity grows, so does a whole lot of focus. And when that focus happens, people rush to the market and oftentimes price increases. So I can do less with more money, which is sad, but that's a real thing.
So looking forward, we need to continue to make systematic changes that encourage good government, right? We know the challenges. The rebate and run, throw it all back, kick the can down the road, on the bridges, on the dams, on the childcare deserts, just, you know, give us the fallacy of small government and then just be shocked when our kids get sent a big bill. So we know that's one side of the problem. We know that on the other side of the problem, we have the fund and forgetters. Don't ask those schools to produce better outcomes. Just throw them money. They'll fix it. Don't worry about the fact that we have a math problem or an English problem. Just throw money at it. Don't worry about best of practices. We recognize those things. They're real. And so as we work to continue to do forward, why a growth and opportunity trust? Why a coal trust? Why a legacy trust in North Dakota? It's to try to incentivize better behavior. What does it do with bridges? It says, hey, look, show us your worst bridges and we will, off the interest of a trust, put up 80% of the money if you, local government, put up 20%, because we need to fix the bridge, because we don't want to fall through it. We need to incentivize maintenance. We need to incentivize maintenance on dams that are very old, that are breaking and falling apart. We need to recognize that for a family to work, childcare is a necessity. And in some places, you can't find it. And if you can find it, you can't afford it. So the infrastructure of childcare, why isn't there more childcare? How do we ensure or incentivize its provision, not pay for it? It's not the government's job to buy your kid childcare. But it certainly can work at trying to incentivize childcare. We talked about housing already. Stop pretending there's a surplus when we have unfunded pensions, deferred maintenance off the charts. Yes, we do need to rebate responsibly. We do need to deal with taxes responsibly. But we need to recognize and structurize those things that actually matter about small government today and tomorrow. And finally, in this day of hyperpartisanism, we need to encourage folks to sit down around that table. Because when the talking stops, bad things happen. We have both parties suggesting that the best legislature is one who kisses the party boss's ring, right? Swear allegiance to a platform somewhere. Swear allegiance to a platform. Well, I'm okay with a platform being a guideline. I'm a Republican. I'm probably going to run down the right-hand side of the road most times. But that's all it is. Why should I throw those I represent under the bus and participate in ribbon cutting and bad government because of some platform? It makes little sense, and both sides do it, right? The challenge I face when I see the ads against me, I've got the Boss Hog ad where I'm all in white, right, and all this, and this big pile of money, and it says, Llew Jones built a trust fund for his cronies. Well, I guess my cronies are people with bridges across Montana. And on the other side, they say, Kim Jong-Llew, leader of the Democratic Party, convincing them to partner with Republicans to do great evils. What evils are we doing? I thought we were trying to solve problems. But yet those are the ads, and those are what people see. You know, and at some point, it's hard to find the folks that want to stand up and say, yeah, go ahead and throw your rocks, because for me, I couldn't sleep at night if I rolled over and played dead. I'm just not good at being a better lemming. But you know who gets the least flack? The best lemmings. We have to work on that. We have to make it so that's not the case.
Sure. Okay. So I think your question was, what's next? And I guess if I could roll through real quickly some of the things that, and Lew's touched on some of these already, but when you think back, when I first got in the legislature, it was 2011, we did not have a fire fund. We were reacting to the fact that when we had a bad fire year, we had to come back into session to find the money to fix it. So we created a fire fund in 2011. In 2015, we realized that there were recessions. They were real. How do we deal with this? We started something called the BSR, the Budget Stabilization Reserve. And you mentioned this, Holly, that we had a lot of opposition to that very thing. And it was merely saying we should make sure that we have enough money to pay our bills in case something bad happens, like a bad fire year or a recession. In 2017, we looked around and we said, you know, we went through, about to have that special session in 2017. The BSR was not full yet. We couldn't use it at that time. But in 2017, in that regular session, we went ahead and looked around and said, my gosh, we have all this maintenance in buildings, state buildings, infrastructure that we need to take care of. We've never budgeted for it. We react to it. So some legislator comes in and says, I need this. St. Mary's, it's a prime example. So we throw $25 million at a project. But that wasn't maintaining anything. We came back in 2019. I can't remember I should have wrote this all down. But it was through those, in 2023, then we came up with a trust. In 23, we paid off all the general fund liabilities. I mean, we've been just chipping away slowly at our liabilities and our risks and our exposures to risk. And when you ask the question, what's next? I mean, there's always going to be tweaks we can make to some of those things, whether we're doing enough maintenance, whether we're storing enough for that. Does the rainy day fund, our BSR, have enough in it? Should we change the rules and how you can access it? I mean, those are things we'll continue to debate and discuss. Things I see on the horizon are things like making the trust better for, it was a tough session. The legislators had a lot of debate about this trust and how to do it and what should be in it. And so that will continue into next session. We probably are going to have to look at a constitutional initiative to allow that trust to be invested in more equities, because it's kind of a debt instrument right now. So it's not really earning as much as it should be earning, or it could be. And so we need to ask the people, because it's in the Constitution that they can't, BOI cannot invest that in equity. So I think those are those little things that we can improve over time. I think two things that as I look into, I would say in the generations that I may or may not see, but water is a big issue in the state. How are we going to deal with exempt wells? Energy is a big issue. How are we going to have enough energy? Because we want more production. We want more manufacturing. We want those things in our state. How do we provide the things, or how do we help get them here? Well, that's going to take water and energy, and those are things we're going to have to deal with. And I think, both of these guys have worked on both those topics, and they're tough ones to work on, but they're big topics we need to address.
Thank you, guys. I could ask 100 more questions since I have you trapped up here, but I've been told it's audience time, so.
Wow, that's loud. First, I gotta say, Llew Jones, I'm totally impressed with you. Like, you sound authentic, and you sound like you want to work across the aisle, and we don't think that. I'm a Democrat, and it's only because I only have that choice. I have two choices. I'd love to see a parliamentary system so that I have more choices, okay? But aside from that, you talked about, planning for the future, but we react to fires. We have now a Medicaid crisis all of a sudden, and I'm wondering if there's a plan already, a rainy day fund for just this crisis, because I think a lot of rural Montanans are gonna lose their insurance. And, I'm not a rural Montana, but I still care about other Montanans having health care. I'm a nurse, so matters to me and to the community. But the other issue, the bigger issue I have a concern about is that it seems to me that the legislature has prohibited local governments from doing their own thing. And that's a big issue here in Bozeman. There's a lot of things that Bozeman people want to do that we're told we can't do because the legislature has proscribed it for us. Among them, a really good sales tax. It's called a luxury goods and services tax. Big Sky has one. 1% of it goes to infrastructure. Big Sky's got pretty nice infrastructure. 3% of it goes to just general community services. Amazing the things that Big Sky has. But we can't, in Bozeman, we can't do it because we understand that the legislature says we can't. And there's a lot of things that it seems like it's virtually centralized communist government telling local authorities what we can and cannot do. So I'd love you to respond to that if you can, and say why can't we make our own local choices, and especially to address a sales tax, like a resort tax that as you said, how much are we selling views now? And all the people coming in using Bozeman 13 to 1 are just crushing our infrastructure. So we need some way to address those issues. Last point is that the AMI, we're using the housing algorithm the housing algorithm is to make affordable housing 60% of AMI, which is a county-wide figure, which includes income from Big Sky. It throws it way off, and it makes people that are working class in Bozeman sort of trying to meet a 60% benchmark for people that are earning passive income in Big Sky. It's 3 different questions, but the main one is whether there's a chance of local government doing things.
Okay, so 3 questions. On Medicaid, we put a lot of effort in 2015, then Senator Buttrey, and to be honest, myself and Oz was around, into what was called the HELP Act. So interestingly, most of the federal requirements that came out were already written into the HELP Act, including the work requirements and the co-pay matches. On the rural side, there's an interesting provision, at least for the next few years, that the rural communities will probably be fine. Now, whether that continues, it's always a function of what the feds change. But when you look at, what was it, the big beautiful bill and the Medicaid provision, it actually isn't negative for rurals. There could very well be, we have a sign-up challenge, right? Because we're going to have folks continue to sign up. I sit on the Benefits Hospital Board. I understand that sometimes, for whatever reason, folks don't stay signed up. We work at that, but ultimately, I believe, at least currently, our alignment in Medicaid is not nearly as negative, and I'm getting that from the MHA, as one might think it is. Second, local option tax. I have consistently resisted a local option tax because I believe the day that a community, one of the big 7 has a local option tax, the conversation about how you deal with a sales tax ends. The second thing is the challenge with a local option tax, and the resort communities, we'll get to them, why it works for them, are a little different, is that they're currently trying in Alaska, but 25% of the goods show up e-commerce. It is doubtful that you will stand a constitutional challenge that e-commerce in a locally applied scenario will be subjected to the tax. So what we're going to do is we're going to tax the local flower shop more, or wherever we choose to apply it, while again, its single largest competitor, and I have no doubt what the single largest competitor is, rolls down the street now even cheaper. I have some trepidation about suggesting that in this state, the local option taxes, because if you notice in Red Lodge, the FedEx truck doesn't pay it, the delivery from the FedEx truck. And that if we create a scenario that's not fully functional statewide, we'll do ourselves a short-term win with a long-term disservice. So until that matter is satisfied that it could also apply, and there's a number of other challenges, whether the outlying communities sign, you're a shopping center, but overall, the big one that always sticks in my mind is the local option. The third one was, what was the third? Oh, housing. We are actually, Mara, I was talking to you about, we are actually putting on data on 2 areas, right? Because what Mara does is put on unbiased data. So if you look, for instance, in House Bill 252, the STARS Act, it has a provision in there to allow stipends and addressing for teachers in local option housing, but we also have that problem with truck drivers, snowplow drivers, et cetera. We don't know the data perfectly yet, but the MARA, the data committee, and it's now part of actually the fiscal division's title. By the end of this session, we will see that area substantially clearer. That, and we'll actually see the water issue substantially clearer, which hopefully, when we can see clearly into exactly what you said, right? Because I have no doubt that the Big Sky section, the Gallatin portion section up there is impacting the value of your homes. When we can see that clearer, maybe we can search for what is a viable solution. Because obviously, housing in Bozeman in particular, but Kalispell, Bozeman, and to some extent Missoula, is truly not affordable in the workforce manner.
We've got time. We're going to go a little bit late because we got started a little bit late, and we want to make sure to give these folks an equal opportunity here. But we do need to get out of here in a few minutes. So we got a couple time for a couple more questions, particularly questions formed in the form of a question. So raise your hand.
Hi, my name's Erica. I live in Missoula, but I graduated from high school from Billings Senior. My dad actually graduated from Conrad High School in 1964. And in 1964 and in 1993, which is when I graduated, driver's ed was taught, and it was free. It's not now. Teachers could have, and both in 1964 and in 1993, that was true. Teachers could afford to live here. Truck drivers could afford to live here and own houses. My son graduates from high school this year, and teachers can't afford to live here. 50% of teachers are leaving the state. But what was true in 1964 and 1993 when my dad and I graduated from high school is that there was a graduated income tax. And the top tax rate was twice as much as the top tax rate is now. And I guess I'm curious why we're talking about a sales tax and how that would pull in Montana versus a graduated income tax rate. So I guess why aren't we having a conversation about a graduated income tax rate? Because it seems like that would avert a lot of the crises that we're talking about in terms of crashes on the road or teachers not being able to live here and people leaving the state for more affordable housing.
I was voted to answer this as well. And so the reason there's been a movement towards a lower income tax is what we're finding in Montana is that more so today than ever before, the employers, the companies, are very sensitive to the income tax. So we do get the $100,000 a year jobs. They may live here, they may telecommute. Actually, Bozeman is what's called a brain hub. But we're finding we're getting an anti-selection because interestingly now, especially the big tech companies, they are able to locate themselves almost anywhere. In the past, and you spoke about 1964 and 1993, it's fairly difficult to move your oil well. It's going to be where it is. It's fairly difficult to move your timber stand. It's going to be where it is. It's fairly difficult to move your mine. And so they weren't capable of avoiding any sort of an income tax. So even if, so they had to locate where the good was. If you look at today's world, whether you're the AI companies, et cetera, you're quite capable of locating yourself where the income tax isn't. And our natural resource companies tended to be property tax incentive, but they could expense stream against our income tax. Today, that's not the case. And so it's an interesting soundbite, and I guess it would catch a whole lot of the folks that like to live here and telecommute, but it seems to have linked where we see that happening to a whole lot of those that employ and pay high wages today locating somewhere else. And thus, again, you would, if you increase the tax on any given Sunday, you're going to get an immediate positive response. If you leave it increased, you get to see what happens. And what tends to happen is you see a negative selection by some of those folks that potentially are those quote unquote cleaner industries, the big payers, the employers start saying, Montana's not the place we want to play. It's not the place we want to headquarter. And so those are some of the conversations that are driving that. On your teacher discussion, The reason we passed the House Bill 250, the STARS Act, which it required money goes to the classroom, was exactly for the reason you said, which is unless we can throw all the money we want at schools, but unless it goes to the classroom teacher, including the beginning classroom teacher, they can't stay here and they become an export and we lose our best and brightest. I actually just worked on that this morning, but it seems to be working there. We do have to deal with, and again, we're talked about putting on data for that, how it is that, you know, the median value house in the state of Montana is 300 and some thousand. In Bozeman, it's 700,000. In some of the rurals, it's 150,000. We have a spread that's beyond incredible, you know. So again, yes, it's a challenge. It's always a conversation we hear, charge the wealthy more. Well, the wealthy are pretty mobile, they leave.
I've been told that we are out of time, and as much as I would love to keep asking you guys questions for the next hour or so, we have to clear the space, I think. So thank you, Director Dorrington, Director Osmundson, Representative Jones. I think we were not boring. I think we entertained people a little bit and informed them, so thank you for your time.